Chief Williams holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Simpson University and a Master of Arts degree from Fort Hays State University in Organizational Leadership. And he is also a 2012 graduate of the FBI National Academy. I'd like to welcome Chief of Police Shawnee Williams. Chief Williams.
Yeah, just really quick. First and foremost, thank you for inviting me here. This is I feel honored to be amidst such great people here on this panel. I only have a few statements. One is that, as a police chief in the city of Vallejo, I think now is the time, it's an opportunity for us, right? They say in the midst of a crisis, you have the challenge or the danger, but you also have an opportunity. And I think now is the time for us to create real change. And for me, internally inside the police department, I believe that, for accountability, you need strong policy and oversight. So you need to be able to craft that. And it needs to be something that is not only something that you do in practice, but that you have written that you can hold people accountable to. You also need active supervision, and you also need to provide exceptional training. So in a police context, and I know we're just one part of a whole system when you're talking about law enforcement, but you also have the educational system that we need to reform. You have healthcare systems, you have economic systems that we need to reform. But I think I like what the pastor is saying, because I like to move from reform to transform. We want a transformation of our system. And that's what I'm seeking to do in the city of Vallejo with the police department, but also with our community leaders, with our schools. It needs to be an entire system that changes if we're going to improve outcomes in our communities. So we'll leave it at that.
Excellent. Well, actually, I'm going to segue right back to you, Chief Williams. Okay. So this is the question that we have, is that in these challenging times where we're dealing with race relations, and it appears that the straw that broke the camel's back has happened, and we are where we are now. What, as a police chief specifically, let's just say are you doing to make sure that police officers are trained properly and held accountable for their interactions that they're having with people of color, more so specifically African-American men, women, and children? Is there a specific training that you're doing to make sure that they're cognizant of that?
Absolutely. Accountability, first, like I said, starts with strong policy and oversight. So when I talk about 21st century policing, we need to be able to build the trust and legitimacy. And one of the ways that we do that is through strong policy and oversight. So I've been here for 8 months in the city of Vallejo, and one of the first things I knew out of the gate we needed to change was our body-worn camera policy. And that was a should activate policy, and that wasn't good enough for me. So we went from should activate to shall activate. So every call for service that a police officer is dispatched to, it's a requirement that they have to activate their body-worn camera policy or body-worn camera. And they have to maintain that. It has to stay on until the completion of that event. The other thing that I saw coming out of the gate was that we needed a de-escalation policy, something that requires us to do that. And that's one of the things that I knew we needed to change, that we needed to craft. And so when I talk about strong policy and oversight, it's important for us to come in and look at our policies to make sure they're in line with community expectations so that we can improve outcomes. The other thing is active supervision. So you need to be able to train up supervisors to ensure that the policies are being followed. And then you need to be able to do performance audits to ensure that that's happening. And lastly, you need to be able to provide exceptional training. So if you're going to hold someone accountable to a certain standard, you have to ensure that they're being trained properly. Those are just some of the things that we're doing now, but you also need to develop your organizational capacity through leadership development. And so those are some of the changes that, concrete changes that I've begun since I've been here. The other part of one of the key changes is who do you recruit? How do you recruit them? How do you background them? And how do you bring them into the fold? So coming in, I brought in 2 new recruiters to the city of Vallejo so that we can recruit the diverse pool of applicants that reflect our community. And so those are some of the changes that I've begun in the last 8 months that I've been here.
Chief Williams, let me ask you a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With all that is going on, definitely, how has your department, and you more so specifically, kind of changed the process and the narrative on community policing and your police officers getting more involved with the community and humanizing individuals in the community? Has that been, have you been having, thought about having an inclusion, or is there an inclusion program that the city of Vallejo is putting in place? Could you tell us something about that?
Absolutely. So I've only been here for 8 months, so I'm not a superhero. I don't walk on water. So, but I do want to say that diversity and inclusion has to be a core value within the police department. It has to be a core value, not only in your value statement, but it has to be a core value in the culture of the police department. And sometimes when you talk about diversity and inclusion, people don't even know what you're talking about. There are companies that have good DI programs, and this is something that we were working on before I left San Jose. Is something that I personally believe that we have to have here. And so that diversity and inclusion, though, culture and the process should start with recruitment. It should start with the outreach that you do so that you can bring in that diverse group of applicants. And then it's not enough just to have diversity, but you have to have the inclusion and the engagement. So you have, and that's a leadership issue. So people need to feel empowered that they can contribute and that they are a part of the family when they do come in. And that's incumbent upon the leadership. One of the things that we do here is we do have a paid cadet program. So that if you're 18 to 24 and you're in college, you get a job and it pays $22 an hour. And we train you to be a leader. We train you if you want a career in law enforcement. That's a community police partnership, right? We also have volunteers. We have our chaplaincy program. We have our Chiefs Advisory Board. We have that level of engagement. But one of the things that I personally believe in is community policing. You can't enforce your way out of the problem. So, I call it PIE. You have to have prevention, intervention, and enforcement in order to be successful in a community. And that community, it has to be a shared vision with the community and the police department. And at the end of the day, people need the police and the police need the community. Because there are people that are only out to kill, steal, and destroy, right? We're up to 15 homicides in the city of Vallejo, and we're only a town of 122 people, right? 12 out of those 15 are African American. So crime and poverty affect our communities disproportionately. And we need the visibility of a police car just driving around a neighborhood, right? We had a call where 5 people were shot. 2 women were killed. And one 10-year-old boy was shot. All right. So the days after that, I called the family of the victim. And one of the questions they asked me, they said, Chief Williams, we don't see police cars anymore around here. What we would like to see just the visibility, people just driving around. And they don't feel safe. And so, one of the things, when I look at stats, I just don't look at the stats. The pastor talked about being data-driven. I believe in being data-driven. We need to be able to look at all of our data and look at where we need resources. But one of the things that I see behind the data are victims, real people. And so I'll tell you about the 12-year-old that saw her mom and 14-year-old daughter shot and killed just this year. And so that she's a real victim. And so we need to remember that behind those victims, they need service. They need trauma-informed service. So one of the things that I want to bring to the city of Vallejo is something called trauma-informed care, trauma-informed policing. That needs to be part of the culture. That's an ongoing type of training. So that changes the mindset from just enforcement to providing service and helping victims. And so that's where we want to be. And I need community support to be able to do that. And so, and I personally do believe in an IPA, the independent police auditor. You need that oversight to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do. But collectively, we just can't look at the police department. You got to look at the educational system, your housing system, your healthcare systems, all the systems, because it's a whole system that produces these negative outcomes.
Excellent. Chief Williams, I think you brought out a really great point that I kind of wanted to piggyback on, that even though there are problems within various different police departments, there are some really good police officers who take to heart that job. And just to say briefly, I live in a community with a lot of law enforcement, from individuals that work at the sheriffs to city police, that are honorable people. However, how do you make sure that the bad that are mixed in with the good, honorable officers who are here to protect and serve are not corrupted? And once you do know that they have racial biases or they have volatile behavior, what does the police department do about that? And then I'd like for any of the other panel after Chief Williams to please piggyback on that.
Okay, well, let me just give you a strong statement that any racial bias, someone that engages in racial bias in word or in deed, that's not going to be tolerated. It should never be tolerated. So we have a professional standards unit that can do that investigation. I have ordered independent investigations in to look at things like that. If that's sustained misconduct complaint like that, there needs to be progressive discipline when it comes to that. So, like I've said before, in order to have accountability, you need to have strong policy and oversight. You also need to have active supervision. You need good leaders, and that comes down to leadership. But you also need to have, like, the pastor doesn't believe in exceptional training. I do, because once I trained you, I gave you the resources to get the job done. If you fail to do it after that, then there has to be accountability. And at the end of the day, if people aren't rising to that level of expectation of providing exceptional service, they have to be held accountable. And so if you have independent police oversight, then that's another layer of accountability that you need to ensure that you're getting what you expect. The other thing that I believe is really critical too is if you have body-worn cameras, you have to have performance audits. That means that you have to have supervisors that review those body-worn cameras. You can bring in someone, you can hire a company to make sure that you're getting the level of performance that you need, and that people are complying with your policies. And so that is something that we're going to be doing within the city of Vallejo. But I believe that that's a critical piece to making sure that you're getting the level of police service that you need. So,
excellent.
I'll stop there. I've heard the conversation about defunding. I came into Vallejo, like I said, eight months ago. Well, in 2008, Vallejo went through a bankruptcy. Vallejo PD, the city of Vallejo. So the police staffing level went from 146 officers down to almost 90 officers just in a period of a few years. So I've looked at the effects of that on the community. So one of the things people probably don't understand is that police officers respond to 911 calls for service. And the city of Vallejo gets per capita more 911 calls for service than the city of Oakland. When you look at the violent crime that's occurring in the city of Vallejo, per capita, per officer, the city of Vallejo is higher than Oakland. And so that's a huge demand for services. And like I said before, when I look at the data, I look at the people behind the data. There's real victims. Our rate for this period, the same time last year to this year, is double than what it was, right? We're up to, like I said, 15 homicides for the year. We're up over 100% for homicides this year. And I look at the shootings, we've had 20 shootings a month. For a small city like Vallejo, that's a lot. And so the officers have to respond to those kind of calls. But after that, people want justice. There needs to be services. There needs to be a detective that follows up on that so we can hopefully stop the perpetrator from committing another act of violence on our community. So when we talk about defunding, you're talking about less officers, longer response times, less officers to provide victim services. One of the things that I'm doing here now is I want to create a family room, a service room. So I told you about that 12-year-old who saw her 14-year-old sister shot to death and her mom shot to death. She confronted that suspect before she ran out of the house. We need a place. We don't have space in the building that we're currently in to put her in a room so we can do that interview with her, a family violence room. something that's comfortable, where you bring in your victim advocate so that you can provide the trauma-informed care that she needs. We need to have space for that. Well, if you defund or you take away funds from the police department, you can't do that. When you have less officers, I got a lot of complaints this weekend because of some sideshows. It's 300 plus people shooting guns and doing sideshows. They call them takeovers. They take over an intersection. Well, when you have less officers, you can't respond to those because it's inherently dangerous. So we get complaints from community members. We got 300 calls in a matter of a few hours for just the sideshow, that reckless driving with the gunshots. So that's what it looks like. Where you can't respond to certain things, or you're not providing the service that the community deserves. So we need to have a well-funded police department where you can provide the services. But I understand that, yes, we need to invest in mental health or have a different type of service where we can respond to. We used to have something called mobile mental health response team, where you could have an officer and someone from behavioral health respond to that call so that we can provide services. You need to have something so that you can do with your homelessness. That doesn't have to be a police call, but you need to have some service for that. And my heart goes out to people like that. And so that is something that we're trying to work on as well. You need to have a homelessness response team. You need to have a mobile mental health response team. You need to have strong CIT, crisis intervention training, so that you know how to respond to people that are having a mental health crisis. So, so that's what defunding to me means, that you're going to try to do those other services so that you can improve outcomes. But if you don't have the necessary service when someone's calling 911, then you're putting your community at risk. And I don't know if that conversation has been explained, but it needs to be when we start to have those conversations. Lastly, I just want to leave you at this. I do believe in, when you're going to look at force, because I know that's the national conversation, one of the things that I'm bringing here to the city of Vallejo is a use of force analysis system. We're going to be one of the few in the Bay Area that can actually analyze use of force. So I've given 3 years worth of data to a company that analyzes force. So we're going to roll out that dashboard publicly so people understand how force is being used, so that when we start to have these conversations, we can have an educated conversation about how we're deploying force, on who we're deploying force, and how we're holding ourselves accountable to the force that we use. And so that's really important. I heard the last speaker talk about having a national database. There's only 88 police departments that have this type of level of force that we're going to have in the city of Vallejo. But I would recommend all police departments in the state of California have this type of system so that we can have a real informative conversation about it.
Excellent.
I'll stop there.